Today's talk is going to be exploring how heartbreak is a doorway for transformation. And I want to play around with this a little bit because oftentimes when we consider in science of mind thinking, it often comes to the notion of our individual expression, that each of us are places through which creation is happening. And I'm going to be exploring that, but I'm going to be logging onto that, attaching to it how as members in community, we have an added power, an added capacity that comes through as we explore ourselves as spiritual members in a community together. And I don't necessarily mean the community of these people here. I mean us as members in the broader community. And community is any time two or more are gathered. And you can even play around with that a little bit, because how many of us have ever noticed multiple voices inside of our own head? that we actually, each of us embody a little community. And that in that we can explore how to be in community with each other. So there's three main questions that are going to guide today's talk. But there are also three main questions that I'm going to extend to you as spiritual practices to engage in, to play around with this notion of heartbreak as a doorway to transformation. So it's the how, it's what, and it's where. How, what, and where. So you can turn on the first slide. How am I? How are we? How many times do we get the question, how are you? And it's so easy. How many times do we simply give that glib, easy response of fine? How many times do we pause to think, are they really interested in how I am? Or is this just a social nicety? Is this just a way to smooth how it is socially to be? How are you? How are you? How are you? And you can tell by the way that they approach you the expectation that they have about how we answer. So the how are you? How am I? We can ask ourselves that question. Because one of the things in science of mind philosophy that Ernest Holmes presented is that if we start with ourselves as powerful places through which the divine is expressing, and we don't even know how we are, how many times have life outpictured in ways that we just did not feel like we signed up for? And ultimately, that's where so much heartbreak comes about. We're moving along in an expected way. We have an idea about how life should be. Or I'll reframe that. I have an idea about how my life should be. I don't know, maybe you are all far more evolved than I am, and you are much more flexible in terms of embracing how life unfolds and what life presents. How am I? How are you? How are we? Let's us put ourselves in the driver's seat of how life goes forward, how we engage and interact with life. So, if we deepen that question, if someone asks us, how are you? We can reflect and ask, do you really want to know? And what are we going to share? How are we going to frame it? How do we be places that can be receptive to what it is that we may hear? There's a person that I work with at school, and when I ask, how are you, I'm legitimately, genuinely interested in the actual how. It's a social nicety I did pick up from my parents. But one of the things that I got from my parents is my mother was extremely interested in the actual how. She can come off of any flight and she can tell you more about this person, these persons that she sat around with. She forms a little community out of this group. She's like, you know, the woman that I was with, she has a daughter-in-law that lives in Seward Park. Now I know that that's in the South End and it's not that far from you. And you could get together with that person and you could do that. And there's this other person, he sells insurance. And I don't know if you're needing any insurance, but she is just remarkable at being able to make the connections. One of the things about heartbreak, one of the things that happens is, for me, that I feel like I am sucked into a black hole. And I may not want to share the how I am in that dark place. I may feel apprehensive. You know, I'm a minister. I have to be always uplifted and always uplifting and always empowered. And there are times, I mean, one of the things that I used to share is that when I graduated from ministerial school, I had gone into full-blown kidney failure. So my transplanted kidney from 1996 had stopped working. And so I was going in for dialysis. And I was really puzzling with this. How is this a manifestation of my thoughts? And what is it that I did to kill off my kidney that this happened? What I came to realize is, though, that my kidney failure exposed me to the Buddha. I've talked a little bit about this. There was a gentleman there, and he was the living Buddha. He would come in every day when I came in. He'd come in a little bit after me, and he was just such a generous, loving presence. The kidney the transplant he received was put in upside down. So it failed within 3 months. Did he have any bitterness? No. None. He was born with kidney disease and he waited to get this kidney transplant and he got this kidney transplant and it didn't work out right. So he's back to dialysis. One of the things that happens with dialysis, you know, I'm not going to get into real details, but what happens is there's a machine. And the machine helps clean out all the blood in your system. And I'm not talking some of the blood. The idea is that all of your blood goes through this machine. So that the machine is like an external kidney. It's a big giant kidney. Now, to get all the blood out, something has to happen. Blood has to come out of your body, get into the machine, and come back into the body. So there are various ways that this happens. He was having a difficult time, so he went in for surgery. And while he was in for surgery to make sure that they had the vessels to the blood, he got third-degree burns because somebody was careless. But again, Kenny's response was just, you know, these things happen. It wasn't like, I'm going to sue. It wasn't like, I've got your name, I've got your number, and I'm taking you down. It was just this gentle, loving, caring approach. So for me, that kidney disease was an opportunity for me to realize, for me to live, that the failed kidney was not a failure in and of myself. It was a means through which I got to be in the loving arms and hands and care of other people. It was a reminder that I don't always have to be the one caring for others. So how we are, how it is that heartbreak comes about, how it is that disappointment comes in, how do we choose to address it? How do we choose to face it? How do we choose to experience it? How do we choose to be with it? Now, many of us know that there are steps and stages in grief. We can respect those grief stages. I'm not suggesting that we just dismiss it all and say, I'm great. You know, that failed kidney was the best thing that ever happened to me. I love this failed kidney. That's something that can be characterized as a spiritual bypass. And spiritual bypass is not necessarily the healthiest way to go. The notion of sheer, simple-minded denial, it's not a problem. How many of us have been in relationships where we just saw something and we're like, this is terrible, but it's not a problem. And we just kept going in that it's not a problem. Until it finally was such a big problem that we could no longer deny it. We could no longer just pretend that it didn't matter. That's the kind of denial that I'm talking about. It's a mindless denial. It's I'm not going to engage with the situation. I'm not going to encounter what it is that's come up to me. I'm not going to be present to this. So how are you? How are we? Because the how that we choose directs how we go forward. So if we can move to the next slide. Maybe. Please. So, I'd like to just read this out loud. Positive emotions broaden our moment-to-moment thoughts and subsequent actions. Joy sparks our urge to play. Interest sparks our urge to explore. Contentment sparks our urge to savor and integrate. And love sparks a recurring cycle of each of these urges within safe, close relationships. Just consider that for a moment. Just consider that the how, we get to choose how to be with things. And this is inspired by a researcher named Barbara Ferguson. She's done a lot of work around positive emotions and the power of positive emotions. Not just as fluffy, bright things, but as genuine building blocks for living differently. How might we choose to engage differently? An illustration that gets indicated is our bodies are designed for fight, flight, freeze. We literally have we have a section of our brain entirely dedicated to this. It's so we survive. Survival. The problem is that we were designed in a very thousands of years ago in a dangerous world. You know, you're walking along and a jackal comes out before you. Now, with a jackal, you fight, you flee, or you freeze. The problem is that our problems nowadays are not like a jackal who is going to rip us apart. But our brain still acts as if that situation that we're facing is a jackal. We need to remind ourselves, you are not a jackal. You are not a tiger. You are not going to rip me apart. My encounter with you is not going to leave me in shreds. If you catch me, really, what's the worst that could happen? Reverend Pamela has talked about the notion of imagining herself under the bridge, living under the bridge. And really, ultimately, it's a first world problem. Because the fact that there is a bridge to live under is far better than not living anymore. So, if we can go to the next slide, please. We're moving into the what. So given that we've got a how, given that we've got possible means of exploring broader ways than simply sticking into anger, popping down into fear, popping down into resentment, we get to deal with what are we going to do? And as two practitioners You're familiar with the notion of be, do, have, that that's the sequence of things. Oftentimes, we look for what we can get first, and thinking that if we get this, then we're going to have, if we have it, if we get it, if it's good, then things are going to be a certain way. We go backwards. Because we've got this, and now we're going to be doing this stuff with this that we've got. And then that will set us up to be happy or excited or joyful or whatever it is. A lot of times when I ask kids, what are your 3 wishes? A Nintendo play something is likely to come up as one of the goals. Most children that I talk with nowadays, video games are really up there in terms of enjoyable activities. This turns it around a little bit, that notion of the M, the how am I, and then the what am I going to do? So, I have dressed for the occasion. Shiri is wearing silk, and I put on silk too. But what are we doing? So, I'm putting on that Black Lives Matter. What am I doing? Am I choosing to be a present, active ally? Do I stand up to say that Black and Brown lives matter? Do I decide to be a person of voice? I was at a meeting the other day, and we were talking about the division of how our time was going to be spread out across the school district. And one of my colleagues, who's also, we're in a racial equity group together, we were noticing that there was a lot of conversation about things in a particular part of the Seattle. And it's like, well, this group needs this, and this group needs this. My friend Shane was able to say, wait a second, do you notice we've just spent 10 minutes about this school? But we didn't even spend a minute talking about taking away from these schools that are primarily African American students. Did you notice that? And he just called it to attention. One of the things that I had said, and I had said it last year, and again, part of it is being able to be a repetitive voice. What I'm doing is, last year I said, we really need to be putting racial equity front and foremost on the table. We have to stop doing things the same old way. I have a colleague, someone that I hung out with, and she sees Black Lives Matter, and her refrain is always, well, all lives matter. And I apologize for taking on that tone. It's just that I get very tired of hearing that press that all lives matter, because the fact is that it's not treated in that way. The whole notion of Black Lives Matter is that it's a group that's been diligently overlooked. The metaphor that gets used is the idea that a house is on fire, and the fire department goes into the neighborhood and then just starts spraying water on the whole neighborhood, while the one house is burning down. Some people still don't get that metaphor. So I'm wearing Black Lives Matter because what am I doing? What are we doing? What do we commit to doing? How do we commit to being in the world? What actions do we take? And, it's so wonderful that Cindy is here, because I was going to use her as an example, and now she gets to be. In response, after the last presidential election, many of you may remember that there was a movement of women who just were angry. That out of the courage that Hillary Clinton had with running, and the kinds of things that she was put through, the kinds of questions that were posed to her, were completely different than what would happen if she had had a penis. If she had had a penis, then these questions wouldn't have happened. The idea of that just terrible mistreatment. And so a bunch of women put together a march on Washington. And Cindy took her 2 daughters with her to march on Washington. And that was what they did. That was what they were doing. Cindy even acknowledged that she is creating, she is supporting, she is uplifting and building the power of her 2 daughters. She is saying that your identity as female, your identity as female is no less. It is powerful, and it is beautiful, and it is great, and it is something to be uplifted and upheld. What are we doing? In response to heartbreak, do we just shut down or do we reach out? I was having a conversation with one of the people that I work with at school. And this is a person who is continually, someone is always calling her. She is always on the radio. We need you, we need you, we need you. And she comes back to her office, and there's a bunch of kids waiting for her because while she was attending to all those needs, the kids were sent to her because they were not being taken care of in their classrooms. So she is definitely somebody that is a powerful presence in doing. And when I asked her one morning, "How are you?" she was like, "I'm fine." And I knew that she wasn't fine. And so we had a conversation, and I said to her eventually, I'm not going to tell you the whole conversation, but basically the idea that I tried to convey to her that I want to share with you is that she is the means through which heaven is happening to all of these calls. Each one of us are the avenues through which heaven is happening. We are the place, we are the angels. When we come forward, what are we doing? We are being the angelic presence. We are being what we are doing, how we are listening, how we are looking at someone, how we are present to them, how we engage with them. We are doing that. I know that as Tan is listening to stories that people share, that her listening presence is a place through which transformation is happening. And sometimes Tan is going to give directions. Many of you have heard, I've made reference to Bob Newhart does this skit where this person comes to him and she's like, "Doctor, I just really need your help. I just can't get out of my house. Help me." And he's like, "Here, it's very easy. Stop it." His deep clinical advice is stop it. We can get so uplifted and encouraged in our helplessness. We can connect with our helplessness. Our helplessness becomes our means of social connection. It's the way that, I'm so helpless. Oh, and, how easy is it that a sad story hooks people in? Because we all love to help, but we also have to find that balance, because are we helping to keep someone disempowered, or are we helping to lift them and change them and move forward? What are we doing? Are we advancing the program? Are we advancing what it is that Spirit is here to do? So, now I think a new joke between me and that person that I work with is, so she asked me, "Are you in heaven?" Are you in heaven? So if I find that I'm not in heaven, I get to ask myself the question, how might I be the angelic presence? How might I be in this place where things are miserable and difficult when I've listened to all of this kvetching about how it is we're going to do things in this one part of the district, but we're not going to do things in this other part of the district? How do I be the angelic presence? How how do we do that? So if you want to go to the next slide. So, some practical things that can be done in terms of what we're doing. We can ground ourselves. We can ground ourselves in 3 activities. We can engage in meditation. We can engage in writing. We can engage in play. Now I'm not listing this as an and. I'm listing these as ors, okay? So think for yourself, what might you possibly add into your life? And maybe you're already doing it, but if you're doing it, just do it consciously. With meditation, I'm not necessarily saying you were going to sit still and om for an hour. Now maybe you will. Maybe that is your jam. Maybe that will be what helps you find a centering place. Meditation may be walking. Meditation may be preparing a meal. Meditation may be creatively endeavoring on something you've never done before, and you are just so caught up in the moment. There's a psychologist, Mykal Csikszentmihalyi, who talks about the flow experience. That flow experience, that we are doing what we're doing, and we have no sense of time. We don't even realize that hours have gone by. I'm letting you consider that if you're already engaged and you get into those moments, that you're already meditating. How many times do you take your dog out? Caring for your dog might be your meditation. Be generous with what you characterize. The notion of write, I'm going to be a little bit more specific, write about something positive. So in the same way that I invited my colleague to consider how she is that expression of heaven, don't be writing about how long you've been living in hell. Kathy Ann Lewis, the minister at Center for Spiritual Living, where Cindy and Leo are practitioners. Practitioner, almost, yep, almost full. Used to talk about the notion of, though I walk through the valley of darkness and through the valley of death. We don't build a condo there. We don't buy the real estate. We don't say, I'm moving in. Kathy Ann would say, we're going through it. So we can go through what's going on for us, but we don't have to dwell there. We don't have to say, I am putting down roots. Now, it's very tempting, isn't it? We all love stability. We all love, we're here, so we might as well make the best of this awful place. The notion of writing about something positive is, it does change how our brains work. It really does. And they have found that these practices, they expand us, they broaden us. Instead of narrowing the focus, which is what happens in fear and what happens in anger. How many people have found that going through the internet, going through Facebook, there can be this focus, this laser focus, and we can lose sight of anything else in the world. So the choice to write something positive can break that open a little bit. And I love what you've brought now, last week and this week. You've brought those moments. I'm sitting with happiness on the swing, and I'm not quite, I know they're there. I might not be seeing them, but I know they're there. That's that expression of the positive. That image that person created, you've now shared with all of us, so all of us can think of happiness as a personal companion. Not simply as the little expression and being inside, but as a physical presence in the world. That when we're driving along, if we're driving or if we're being driven, that happiness is sitting in the back seat. If I'm walking on my way to school, that happiness is trailing me. Or happiness just slipped around the corner where I know I'm going. So consider that and play. How many times do we lose sight of simple play? how many of us were encouraged that play comes last? A big thing that the Seattle Education Association, the union, has done is it's been standing up for play for children. Because there was a big push. You know, we've got to get every minute that we can squeeze out for education. We have to get up those reading levels. We have to make these kids mathematicians who can do better than any calculator. And the idea is we just spend more minutes on this, that this will work. But the research actually shows that that's not the case. Kids do much better when they have opportunities for play, for physical movement. Is it any wonder? You may hear that kids get suspended and kids have problems in schools. Part of this is there's so much expectation put on kids and so little opportunity for play. I can tell you, I stepped out of my office several times this week and kids were playing, but they were playing on a machine just by themselves, and there was nothing, no interaction. The kind of play I'm talking about is interactive play. I'm not just talking about solitaire. I mean, I'm not putting down solitaire, but let's engage in some social play. What is it to have a word game, a joke with someone that we're with? What is it to just engage in play? And that leads us to the last part. The last question is, where am I going? Where are we going? Like I said, Cindy and her daughters went to D.C. So that actually brings me to the next layer. The next layer. My clothing. Yep. Let's see. So, stretch.
No wonder that t-shirt was tight on you, huh?
There. So, where are we going? Are we going out into the world with a mission, with a vision, with an opportunity? So, born this gay. So, one of the things that you may or may not know is Mykal and I on the final Sunday will be going to Gay Pride rather than hosting the service on the last Sunday of the month. And like you saw during the talk, Gay Pride is about an acknowledgement, about saying that who we are is fine. I don't know, many of you might be familiar that there's been a movement about straight pride. That there would be a straight pride parade in Boston in August. And there's been all kinds of, I would say moderately funny things. One of the things about being gay, being queer, is that it was not something that was readily encouraged. I mean, when I was growing up, the question is, who will you marry? And there was no expectation of you'll be marrying a guy. We have lived in a society that has impressed that there's a certain way of being. Gay pride is an obstacle to those standard expectations. I'm very excited. I work at a school where a number of students are coming to claim that the gender that they are identifying as is not the gender that they were born with. Their genitalia doesn't match how they feel in the world. And I'm grateful to be in a place that has encouraged who they are, rather than in a place that has tried to push them down into a box. I mean, we have a gender sexuality alliance group, and they have developed a whole set of tools so that students who are making a transition in terms of they've always been known as Antoinette and as she, and they want to be known as Tony and he. And there's a whole set of materials for how to do that in a supportive way. I was doing an evaluation with a student, and at the end of the evaluation, I always ask the students, well, do you have any questions for me? I've been asking you all kinds of questions, and you've been teaching me all along. Do you have any questions for me? And this one young man said, so, are you married? And I'm like, yes, I am married. It's like, well, tell me about your spouse. And you'll notice that the person was very deliberate. They did not say, tell me about your wife. So there's a thing that happens among gay people that opens that space. When I was first coming out, I was very clear. Yes, I'm dating someone. This person is really nice. I love this person. I love spending time with this person. You can become very quick at taking out all references to gender and making it very safe to talk about, yes, this person works at Boeing and this person does all kinds of things with the church that they're involved with. You know, the pronoun, I can turn it into them really easy because you have to be thoughtful in certain settings. Because I was at one place where literally I had a parent say, I don't want that faggot working with my kid. You're not going to have that happen. So sometimes there's an acceptance, sometimes there's not. But this young man asked me, well, tell me about your spouse. And then I thought, well, he's saying it in such a way. So I said, well, my husband, he, and he's like, I knew it. I knew it. And I'm like, so what are you thinking that you knew? Well, you seemed like you'd be gay. And it felt gratifying. And then he said, and I'm bi. That's how I identify. And it's striking because this person is 12 years old. 12 years old, and he can state it in this way affirmatively. Where am I going? Am I going to a world that has people feel welcomed for who they are? Am I going to a world where people have a place to be? Are we going to that world? Is that the destination that we have set up? So to conclude, I actually have an affirmation for us to share together. So please, we're going to do this 3 times, okay? So, I choose joy so that I want to play. I choose interest so that I explore. I choose contentment, allowing me to savor and claim good for all. I choose love in safe, close relationships that welcome joy, interest, and contentment. Second time. I choose joy so that I want to play. I choose interest so that I explore. I choose contentment, allowing me to savor and claim good for all. I choose love in safe, close relationships that welcome joy, interest, and contentment. And one last time. I choose joy so that I want to play. I choose interest so that I explore. I choose contentment, allowing me to savor and claim good for all. I choose love in safe, close relationships that welcome joy, interest, and contentment. And so it is.
And so it is.